I want to start with a story. A few years ago, I was walking into a meeting, one of those big, important ones where everyone sits up a little straighter. As I reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection. And you know what my first thought was? Do I look like I belong here? Not am I prepared, not do I have something valuable to contribute, just that deep, nagging fear of being judged. And the crazy thing, I had done the work. I knew my stuff, but there I was, stuck in a loop of, what will they think? Sound familiar? We all do this. We walk into rooms, into conversations, into our lives, wondering, am I enough? And the truth is, worrying about what others think isn't just a small inconvenience. It can shape the way we live, the risks we don't take, the joy we don't allow ourselves to feel. But here's what I want to talk about today, how we stop that fear. It's wired into us. Humans are social creatures, built for connection, and our brains are designed to keep us in the tribe. Thousands of years ago, rejection meant danger. So when we feel judged, our nervous system treats it like a survival threat. That's why it feels so big. But understanding this helps us take a breath and say, oh, this is just my brain trying to keep me safe. Let me tell you a quick story. I was giving a talk once, big audience, bright stage lights, the whole deal. And right before I walked out, my heart was pounding. You'd think after all these years, I'd be over it. But my brain, it was screaming. What if they don't like you? What if you mess up? What if you say something dumb? That voice in my head, it wasn't logic, it was biology. It was my brain doing what human brains do, protecting me from the modern version of exile. See, thousands of years ago, if we didn't fit in, we were in trouble. Rejection meant we'd be left behind, and being left behind meant, well, no shelter, no food, no protection. So today, when we feel left out, judged, or like we don't belong, our nervous system reacts as if our survival is at risk, even if it's just an awkward conversation at work. Even if it's just a weird silence after a joke that didn't land. But here's what's powerful. Once we name this fear, we take away some of its control. Instead of letting it shape our choices, we can step back and say, oh, this is just my brain running an old survival program. We don't have to listen. The key isn't to eliminate fear, it's to recognize it for what it is. A feeling, a protective reflex, not a truth, not a verdict, just a little warning light that doesn't always mean danger. And when we see it that way, we can move forward anyway. We need to get real about the people we're so afraid of disappointing. Because if we're really honest, most of the time we're not worrying about the opinions of the people who love us. We're worrying about strangers on the internet. Colleagues who won't remember what we said in a week. That one person from high school whose life we don't even follow anymore. Let's stop giving away our power to people who were never meant to hold it. I had a moment not too long ago where I caught myself spiraling. I had said something in a meeting, nothing major, just an off-the-cuff comment. But later that night, I found myself replaying it. Did that come across the wrong way? Did I sound stupid? And then I had to stop and ask myself, who exactly am I so worried about? Because the people who know me, the ones who genuinely care about me, weren't sitting there analyzing my words. It was all in my head. And that's the thing, we tie ourselves in knots over what they might think. But who is they? Research tells us we vastly overestimate how much people actually think about us. It's called the spotlight effect. Our brains convince us that everyone is noticing, remembering, and judging every little thing we do, but in reality, people are mostly thinking about themselves. The same way we replay awkward moments, they're doing the same with their own. So much of our fear comes from this illusion that the world is keeping score, that there's a panel of judges rating how well we perform in every interaction. But there isn't. And the few voices that do criticize us, most of them are coming from their own insecurities, not some universal truth about who we are. And when we really understand that, we start to see how much of our energy has been wasted on people who were never actually paying that much attention. Perfectionism feeds this fear. If I believe I have to be perfect to be accepted, I will spend my whole life editing, filtering, and performing. And do you know what that guarantees? Exhaustion. Perfection is armor, and the moment we put it down, we get something so much better: belonging. I learned this the hard way. For years, I believed that if I could just get it right, say the right things, look the right way, never make mistakes, then I'd feel safe. Then no one would have a reason to judge me. But what I didn't realize was that perfectionism wasn't protecting me. It was suffocating me. Because here's the thing, perfection is an illusion. No matter how much we edit ourselves, someone will still disapprove. No matter how carefully we construct our image, someone will still misinterpret us. And even if by some miracle we did manage to please everyone, we'd still be left with one exhausting truth: we weren't being ourselves. Research shows that perfectionism isn't the path to excellence. It's the fast track to anxiety, depression, and burnout. It keeps us stuck in a cycle of never enough. And worst of all, it doesn't create real connection. Have you ever met someone who seems too perfect? It doesn't make them more lovable. It makes them feel distant, untouchable. What draws us to people, what makes us feel truly connected, isn't their perfection. It's their realness. So the choice is this: we can chase an impossible standard and exhaust ourselves trying to be bulletproof, or we can show up as we are and let the people who truly matter see us. One of those paths leads to loneliness. The other leads to freedom. And the moment we stop trying to be perfect, we make space for something so much better: being loved for who we actually are. People are thinking about us far less than we believe. I know that stings a little, but it's freeing. The imaginary audience in our heads, they're too busy thinking about their own worries, their own lives. The weight we're carrying, it's mostly self-imposed. I remember a time when I walked out of a talk feeling completely exposed. I had shared a personal story, one of those moments that felt raw and real. And as I left the stage, my brain went into overdrive. Did I say too much? Did I sound ridiculous? For hours afterward, I kept replaying it, cringing at every little detail. And then later that evening, I ran into someone from the audience. I braced myself, waiting for their feedback. And do you know what they said? That one part about fear really hit home for me. I've been thinking about how that applies to my own life. Not a word about my awkward pauses. Nothing about the thing I thought I'd messed up, because they weren't focused on me, they were focused on themselves. That's what we forget. We assume people are keeping a running tally of our mistakes, but in reality, they're carrying their own worries, their own self-doubts. The spotlight effect, a well-documented psychological phenomenon, proves that we believe we're being noticed and judged way more than we actually are. We replay that one awkward moment for hours, but everyone else, they moved on 5 seconds later. And this realization, it's a gift. It means we can stop holding ourselves back, stop shrinking, stop playing small because we think every move is being scrutinized. Because more often than not, the only person keeping track is us. And if we let go of that, we give ourselves permission to show up fully, without fear of an audience that doesn't actually exist. Confidence doesn't come from being liked. It comes from self-trust. If I know who I am, what I value, and what I stand for, I can walk into any room without needing external validation. I can show up as myself, knowing that my worth isn't up for debate. For years, I thought confidence was something you earned, that if you were good enough, likable enough, or accomplished enough, you'd eventually reach this magical place where you just felt confident. But what I've learned and what research confirms is that confidence isn't built on external approval, it's built on self-trust. Think about someone you truly admire, not because they're perfect, but because they have that undeniable presence, that grounded energy. Chances are, it's not because everyone likes them. It's because they trust themselves. They know who they are. They don't walk into a room scanning for permission to exist. They walk in already knowing they belong. Self-trust is about keeping promises to ourselves. It's about showing up in ways that align with our values, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means disappointing people. When we betray ourselves for the sake of approval, we erode our confidence. But when we stand firm in who we are, we build a foundation that no amount of external judgment can shake. And the best part, we don't need to have it all figured out to start trusting ourselves. We just need to pay attention. When something feels off, when we feel that gut pull that says this isn't right for me, we listen. When we make a choice that aligns with our values, we acknowledge it. Over time, those small acts of self-trust add up, and before we know it, we're standing taller, not because the world told us we could, but because we decided for ourselves. And when we stop outsourcing our confidence to other people's opinions, something incredible happens. Their approval becomes irrelevant. Criticism is inevitable, but not all criticism deserves a seat at our table. When I'm struggling with judgment, I ask myself, is this feedback coming from someone who's willing to be in the arena with me? If not, if they're just watching from the cheap seats, then their opinion isn't mine to carry. I can't tell you how many times I've hesitated before hitting send, before stepping onto a stage, before sharing something real, because in the back of my mind, I'm already anticipating the criticism. What if someone doesn't like this? What if they pick it apart? And here's the truth. Sometimes they will. But when I let that fear dictate my choices, I'm handing over my power to people who were never supposed to hold it. There's a difference between thoughtful feedback and drive-by criticism. Thoughtful feedback comes from people who care, people who want to see us grow, who are invested in our journey. But drive-by criticism, that comes from people who aren't in the game. They're not risking anything. They're just watching. And if someone isn't willing to be vulnerable, to take their own risks, then their opinion about how I'm showing up doesn't carry weight. I love the way Theodore Roosevelt put it. It's not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the one in the arena, the one who's showing up, trying, failing, and trying again. If we live our lives trying to avoid criticism, the only thing we guarantee is that we'll never do anything meaningful. Because anything worth doing, anything that asks us to be real, to be seen, will invite opinions. Some kind, some harsh, some completely irrelevant. But at the end of the day, the voices that matter are the ones that come from people who are out there with us, doing the work, standing in the discomfort. Those are the ones worth listening to. The rest, we can let it go. Vulnerability is the antidote to fear. When we stop hiding, when we show up as we really are, we take away the power of judgment. Instead of saying, I hope they don't find out who I really am, we say, here I am, take it or leave it. And you know what? The right people will stay. I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I was smart enough, prepared enough, polished enough, then I wouldn't have to feel exposed. That confidence would mean never feeling vulnerable. But the truth is, confidence isn't about eliminating vulnerability. It's about embracing it. Think about the moments when you felt deeply connected to someone. It wasn't when they had it all together, when they were perfectly composed and effortless. It was when they let you in, when they shared the hard thing, the real thing, the thing they could have kept hidden but didn't. That's when we feel closest to people, not when they impress us, but when they allow us to see them. The same is true for us. The more we try to control how people see us, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from ourselves. We think we're protecting ourselves from judgment, but what we're really doing is making sure no one ever fully knows us. And what's more terrifying than that? The irony is, the thing we fear, being judged, being rejected, is far more likely to happen when we're wearing a mask. But when we have the courage to say, this is me, here's what I believe, here's what I care about, here's where I struggle, we don't just quiet the fear, we create space for real belonging. And belonging is always worth the risk. The people who matter will love you for who you are, not for how well you perform, not for how perfectly you fit their expectations, but for you. And when you start showing up as your real self, two things happen. The wrong people drift away, and the right people step in closer. I think deep down we all have this fear that if people really knew us, flaws, quirks, messy emotions, all of it, they might walk away. So we edit, we filter, we play the role we think we're supposed to play. But here's the painful truth. When we spend our lives trying to be what they want, the love we receive isn't actually ours. It belongs to the version of us we created to please them. And that's exhausting. Real belonging, the kind that fills us up and makes us feel safe, can only happen when we stop performing. When we decide that we'd rather be fully seen by a few than half known by everyone, that's when we find our people. The ones who love us not in spite of our imperfections, but because of them. And yes, stepping into that kind of authenticity comes with risk. Some people won't get it. Some relationships will shift. But that's not proof that something's wrong with you. It's proof that you're growing into the life you're meant to have. At the end of the day, the people who truly see you, who truly love you, won't need you to be anything other than yourself. And when you start living from that place, when you stop worrying about who might not accept you and focus on the ones who do, that's when you find real freedom. So here's the truth. You will never be able to control what other people think of you. No amount of perfection, performance, or people-pleasing will ever guarantee acceptance. But what is in your control? The way you show up. The way you choose to stand in your own worth, knowing that you are already enough, no approval required. The fear of judgment will always be there. It's part of being human. But fear doesn't have to be in the driver's seat. You can acknowledge it, take a deep breath, and move forward anyway, because the cost of living for other people's approval is you. And you are far too valuable to be lost in someone else's expectation. So let go of the people who don't see you. Stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never meant for you. Step into your life fully, unapologetically, and trust that the people who matter, the ones who truly love you, will meet you there. Good luck, be brave, and most of all, be you. Thank you.